A season with Sadio Mané at Bayern Munich is in the books, and if stories in the media are to be believed, then who knows, it could be a one-and-done situation. It could have been his only season with the Bavarian Giants. I mean, Tuchel himself even said recently that Sadio Mané's performances fell short of expectations, something that he assured Mané was already made well aware of, both the opinion of Tuchel and the club, that is. So now Mané is stuck in a strange limbo. The injury from the fall didn't help, nor did the bust-ups with teammates and former managers alike. There is indeed a big offer on the table from Saudi Arabia, because of course there is. And whether he stays or goes is seemingly up to Mané. But what went wrong with his time at Bayern exactly? How does he go from a massive success at Liverpool to the second or third choice player at Bayern? Hey guys, I'm Adrian, and thanks for joining me for this look at Mané's first year at Bayern Munich. To help me with this video, I've called upon Stefan Bienkowski, the UK content manager for Transfermarkt, as well as a co-host of Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm looking forward to this one, man. All right, let's dive in. While Sadio Mané's final season with Liverpool was by no means his all-time best, he was still certainly a massive player in Klopp's attack. Even with a mid-season slump and some international duty as he went away to win the Africa Cup of Nations, he returned to Liverpool to score some important goals in the latter half of the season. Goals in the Champions League knockout rounds, including helping Liverpool to the final of the competition, as well as propelling them to the final of the League Cup, of which they won. However, it was soon to be made known that he would be leaving Liverpool come the end of the season, with the then 30-year-old looking for a move elsewhere, having won everything that he could with Liverpool. He wasn't quite moving back to where he first gained notoriety in Europe, that being with RB Salzburg of course, but he was close. Salzburg and Munich are only a couple hours away from each other, and share many similarities culturally, despite the border that divides them. So, Munich it was, with Lewandowski leaving. Mané joined Nagelsmann's side to try to carry some of the load that the Polish marksman was leaving for his former teammates goals-wise.
He was really considered a blockbuster signing for Bayern. You know, they've obviously for a long time, at least in the modern era, been considered a super club, but Bayern aren't really the kind of club that go out and buy top tier ready-made talent. They tend to kind of, not really bargain basement kind of thing, but they do tend to kind of look for value for their money. I think Sadio Mané's move just came so suddenly out of the blue that it just kind of caught a lot of Bayern fans by surprise and excitement. You know, I think there was definitely a degree that, you know, they're getting a real kind of bona fide star who could help them make that step up in the Champions League. And at the start, you know, he was maybe a little rusty to begin with, but he certainly kind of showed exactly what he'd been doing for Liverpool. There was obviously that kind of cloud hanging over him in terms of Lewandowski moving on, but maybe Bayern fans wouldn't be able to admit this now with the benefit of hindsight, but at the time, it felt like a kind of exciting idea to replace Lewandowski with a player like this, rather than another kind of number 9 like Vlahovic or a Harry Kane or someone like that. So yeah, I think at the start, it was a really good kind of exciting moment for the player and the club.
His move to Bayern did indeed bring a lot of excitement, and it also brought questions of how Bayern would line up with the living Senegalese football legend. Now, previously, Bayern were absolutely married to their 4-2-3-1 formation, and in bringing in Julian Nagelsmann, who certainly played with a very different shape with his previous sides, it did beg the question of, will Bayern begin playing in a shape and style that was more reminiscent of Nagelsmann's past, where an out-and-out number 9 wasn't really a necessity, or would Mané be slotted in somewhere in the 4-2-3-1 and Bayern would stick with their bread and butter? Well, it was certainly a good question, with Nagelsmann feeling like the manager who wouldn't hesitate to move Bayern away from their roots, to be trusted to take them in a new direction with Mané in the attack.
You know, you have to remember as well that Nagelsmann's first season at the club was kind of, I don't want to say dogged, but there was definitely that kind of subtext, the fact that Lewandowski was always going to push for a move at the end of the season. And, you know, if there was a head coach in Germany that could kind of deal with this kind of new age transition from a very classic number 9, which is a position that Bayern are kind of synonymous with in Germany. They've always had kind of classic number 9s going through the years. So if there was a head coach who could kind of take them into this bright new era of strikerless football, then Nagelsmann was that guy. And he kind of leaned into that as well in his press conferences. He was happy to talk about tactics, happy to talk about how they would move on from Lewandowski without signing another player like him. And I think the other kind of thing as well is that while Lewandowski was an outstanding player for Bayern, and you know he was at times single-handedly responsible for a lot of their success when he was there, there was always a kind of sense that when they got to the latter stages of the Champions League, playing with that classic number 9 maybe kind of limited Bayern to an extent when they were playing against other clubs who had, 10 players kind of chasing the ball, not so rigid in position. So there was definitely a sense that Sadio Mané kind of embodied that new idea of playing with a different team, different tactics, and something that would perhaps allow Bayern to get back on an even footing with the other bigger clubs around Europe.
His time with Bayern certainly started well, scoring in his Bundesliga debut, a 6-1 drubbing of Eintracht Frankfurt. 2 match days later, he scored a brace against Bochum during a 7-0 dismantling. In all, Mané managed to score 7 goals in the Bundesliga to go with his 5 assists. Now, something that I noticed here that's a bit interesting, and perhaps speaks to the fact that he wasn't the decisive match-winning scorer that Bayern and their supporters had hoped he would be in the first season with them. But what I noticed is that if you look at the matches that Mané managed to score in the Bundesliga, beyond scoring in a 3-1 loss against Mainz, every single one of his other goals came in matches where Bayern won by a minimum deficit of 4 goals. His goal contributions were essentially that image of the water polo player dumping water on his head. When other opportunities arose, in more important matches, he failed to take advantage of them.
There were already kind of question marks beginning to show. Mané wasn't as clinical in front of goal in league games as he perhaps was expected to be, which, again, if you kind of look back at his time at Liverpool, he was never like a clinical number 9. He was never a Mohamed Salah. He was never a Harry Kane. He was a player who got into a lot of positions and a lot of chances. And over the course of the season, scored a lot of goals. But I think it kind of dawned on Bayern fans towards the end of 2022 that he wasn't going to be their talisman, and the club would have to kind of start beginning to kind of rely on other players to kind of compensate for that, if you will. And I think once that injury kind of hit, it also kind of coincided with, Bayern kind of really having a really difficult run. Now, by any other club stretch, it wouldn't be considered a difficult run. They were still undefeated in the Champions League. They were still thereabouts in the league. But for Bayern to be in a crisis is to drop points in, 3 out of 5 games, maybe lose the odd match, potentially get chucked out of the German Cup. All of a sudden, there were huge question marks. And what begins to happen at Bayern when that happens is that the head coach has to kind of carry all this on his shoulders, not just from the fans, but he suddenly begins to get a lot of kind of feedback and suggestions from the board and the chairman and sporting director. And by the time Mané returned from injury after the kind of January or the winter break, there had been a kind of shift, and all of a sudden there was a reversion back to that kind of classic number 9 role. So as we said a minute ago, Nagelsmann tried to kind of use the Mané deal as this opportunity to bring this new era. At the kind of first hiccup of form or drop of performances, the club very quickly reverted back to saying, no, look, let's just get a big guy in the box, let's just do what we're good at. And luckily they had Choupo-Moting kind of sitting on the bench, kind of just, put his feet up. He hadn't really done a huge amount, but he was more than happy to kind of step in. So it wasn't so much that Choupo-Moting came in for Sadio Mané in a like-for-like replacement. It was the fact that the club itself and the team's tactics reverted to a way that kind of made Mané's, contributions more limited going forward.
We'll speak more later about how Bayern's season was tumultuous for almost everyone, but for Mané in particular, it seemed like he showed up to the job without getting any clarity on where he should be, Or perhaps it was Bayern who were a bit too ambitious when it came to their hopes of Sadio Mané playing through the middle, because it didn't work out too well. Or at least it failed to meet expectations. Once Choupo-Moting came in, a true number 9, he occupied that area, and through his form, he had every right to be there. On the wing, well, he had quite the competition there as well. It was as if he wasn't playing at a high enough level to be a bona fide number 9, nor the number 1 choice for the left flank, where he was at home for Liverpool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you actually look at his numbers, they're actually pretty comparable to how he did at Liverpool. I think, if I'm not mistaken, actually his goals and assists per 90 in the Bundesliga were better in his last 2 or 3 seasons in the Premier League. Of course, Liverpool fans might argue that, he was on the kind of downward spiral at that point. Fair enough, but they're still perfectly reasonable numbers. But yeah, the issue was that he wasn't a number 9, but also the other problem as well is that once that kind of tactic kind of shifted back to that kind of 4-2-3-1, and Mané would have kind of naturally filled in as a number 10 or as a left winger, he suddenly became up against immediately some really established players in that team. In terms of the actual big kind of hitters, in terms of the guys who get paid the most amount of money, it's your Leroy Sanes, it's your Serge Gnabry's, it's your Kingsley Coman's. Sadio Mané couldn't have been up against three more established players, aside from maybe Joshua Kimmich, or if he was to try a shot in goals alongside Manuel Neuer. So, not only did he not suddenly have a position that he would want to play in that team, but he was up against three players who, even if Nagelsmann did want to move on from them, there would be a huge amount of kind of pushback from the hierarchy of the club, perhaps even some fans. And, I think maybe had Sadio Mané really played out of his skin, maybe kind of hit new heights in terms of goals and assists, then, you could maybe argue he was unplayable. They couldn't drop him, and the likes of Sane and Coman and Serge Gnabry would have had to wait their chance. But that didn't really seem to be the case. Kind of suddenly found himself being second or third choice left winger at a club that spent a considerable amount of money on him not so long ago.
Now, of course, in the name of balance, you can't speak about Sadio Mané's first season in Bavaria without speaking about the prominent bust-ups or disagreements he had. Now, there are funny ones, such as when it was revealed that Sadio Mané led the Bundesliga in disallowed offside goals, only for his PR agency to speak up and blame his teammates for as many offside goals. That was a funny, quite harmless one. A less funny one for the people involved, surely for his teammates and former manager Julian Nagelsmann, would have been when Mané allegedly exploded on the young manager back in March of 2023, prior to his sacking, of course. According to Bild, following Bayern's 2-0 win over PSG, Mané was incensed at the fact that he was only given 8 minutes of playing time against PSG in the second leg, having missed the first through injury. Mané allegedly let loose on Nagelsmann, which, according to Bild, his teammates noted that Nagelsmann seemed intimidated by Mané in the dressing room. And just to be clear, I'm not implying that this incident had anything to do with Nagelsmann being sacked a couple matches later. Who knows, maybe it did, but I can't confirm that. There are murmurs that both Mané and Sane wanted Nagelsmann out, but they're murmurs. We haven't heard from an official source. Now, from one Champions League bust-up to another, and you know where we're going with this one. To Manchester, where following a 3-0 loss to City and a 20-minute cameo from Mané, he was seen arguing with Sane at the end of the match. Well, it was later revealed that this argument escalated all the way to the dressing room, with Mané turning and punching Sane in the mouth, leaving Sane with some abrasions for his trouble. Mané was, of course, suspended for one match by Bayern and fined, and he didn't hide from the truth. Speaking to a Senegalese TV station, Mané said, quote, "Something like that can happen. It happened. We were able to solve this small problem. Sometimes it's good to solve problems, but maybe not in this way. That's behind us now." I guess the suspension and the fine was also a confirmation that this happened. But anyway, according to James Westwood of Goal.com, Mané's involvement in the two rows did indeed raise some concerns at Bayern Munich about his temper. However, Tuchel was supportive of Mané following the incident, saying, quote, "I am his first lawyer and his first defender. I've known him for so long and I know his entourage. He has my full support. He had that before and he still has it after this mistake that he has made. Everyone has the right to make a mistake." With the benefit of hindsight now, however, were these words to just steady the ship, or did he really mean them?
I think this was probably Tuchel maybe using all the diplomacy he had at his disposal. You have to remember that even though Bayern did win the league title eventually, it came down to the very last day, and ultimately a Dortmund kind of implosion in the Bundesliga. So I think they kind of had to keep a happy kind of front, because you have to remember as well that towards the end of the season, Thomas Tuchel was also under a huge amount of pressure because he was brought in to kind of improve the performances, very quickly turn things around, and he was unable to do that. And at the time, he obviously had to kind of keep things steady, had to make sure there wasn't some sort of circus on and off the pitch. But I think it was probably abundantly clear that if Bayern were going to have to move players on to kind of make place or make space for the likes of Harry Kane, Sadio Mané was always going to be probably one of the leading contenders for that.
Now, it seems as though the winds of change have blown through Bayern. While Mané has indeed shown up for preseason and has expressed his desire to stay and fight for his place. Hey, he even scored the 27th goal in Bayern's 27-0 win over Rotak Egern. Close one, eh? However, where Tuchel was very supportive of Mané previously, when asked about his attacker's performances last season, it seemed like that really was just diplomacy from Tuchel, given they had a title to win in the Bundesliga, or to fight for at least. But now that there is a fresh slate for the German manager, when he was asked about Mané, he basically said everything but that Mané should leave the club, which Would have been a ridiculous thing for the coach to say, of course. Tuchel did say, quote, "He fell short of expectations. The competitive situation is extremely high. The starting position is not easy for him. The player knows that too. He knows my opinion and the opinion of the club." So what are the options? Well, he has a really difficult fight for a starting position. The middle will be taken by Kane, should he make the miraculous move away from Spurs. And on the left wing, he has the likes of Coman or Sane to go up against. Like Tuchel said, the competition for positions is really difficult in the attack. Plus, Matthias Tel is looking good through the middle. Now, apparently there is an offer on the table from Al Nassr, somewhere in the region of 30 to 40 million euros for the transfer fee, which Bayern would gladly bite their hand off for that, as it would mean that they didn't take a huge loss on the player. Not counting signing on fees and wages, of course, strictly looking at what they paid Liverpool for him previously. No confirmations yet as to whether Sadio Mané will accept this offer. Like I said, the last that we heard was that he wants to stick it out with Bayern and fight for his place in order to continue in Europe. So what went wrong here for Mané, a player that was so revered for Liverpool? Well, you have the bust-ups, you have our discussions about where he really fits within the squad as far as his position goes, and you have a season where it was a bit chaotic by Bayern standards.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would kind of stress that for the most part, he has been a victim of circumstance. You know, we kind of talked about the way they didn't quite fit into Nagelsmann's team, and that was certainly the case when Tuchel came in. But I think what's kind of been added to that is that Tuchel's been under a huge amount of pressure because that kind of new manager bounce that we forever talk about in football never really happened, aside from, you know, a quite impressive win over Dortmund in their Klassiker. It just kind of fell apart after that. So he's under a huge amount of pressure to make sure he gets things right next season. But also the fact that Hasan Salihamidzic and Oliver Kahn were both sacked at the very end of the season. And what that meant in the short term was that Tuchel very quickly gained a lot of responsibility and power in terms of what players the club went for the summer, what players they moved on. And all of a sudden, he was kind of calling the shots to a large extent, not fully, but he had a much bigger role in who got to stay and who got to go. So I think with that in mind, you know, he probably has had to try and accelerate this idea that, right, we have to move Sadio Mané on because we don't have a space for him in the squad. We need to clear up these kind of wages. We need to get some money for him, which now looks likely to be the case. I mean, maybe if another sporting director had come in time, maybe he could have sat down with Mané, could have sat down with Tuchel, and they could have planned something out. But I think because of the kind of urgency that the club are now under to turn things around before the start of the season, Tuchel was very happy to kind of cut his losses with Mané. And that seems to be the case, and that's probably what's going to happen in the coming weeks now.
If he can find his form, he could still be a great player for them. But only time will tell, right, guys? I want to thank Stefan for joining me. He's absolutely brilliant, so be sure to check him out on Twitter. And listen to Gegenpressing if you have an interest in all things Bundesliga. Beyond that, I'm Adrian. Thanks for watching, and be well. Ciao.